My name is Colleen and I am 28 years old. Step back and don't humiliate this family in front of the elites who are about to arrive. My sister's bitter voice hissed in my ear amidst the lavish banquet hall. Immediately, my biological father stepped forward and roughly shoved my shoulder into a hidden corner near the service aisle, strictly forbidding me from showing my face in the main hall. I stood quietly in the shadows, watching my family's extravagant preparations for an engagement party where I was completely isolated and despised. The suffocating atmosphere was suddenly broken when the powerful arrival of the groom's corporate chairman father forced all the guests to stop their conversations and turn to look. Instead of stepping onto the stage of honor, the older man's decisive footsteps unexpectedly parted the high society crowd, heading straight toward the dark corner where I was standing in silence. He rushed over and grabbed both of my hands tightly before the absolute shock of the very relatives who had just chased me away, his voice trembling as it rang out. "Are you Hart, the genius who saved my family's entire legacy 5 years ago? If you want to know how this outcast child turns the tables on such cruelty and makes those vain people pay a heavy price, hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell right now so you don't miss the spectacular events that follow." Watching from afar as the crowd began to direct their attention toward the stage, I quietly recalled the reason I decided to leave this place. Bitter childhood memories surfaced about how Angelica was always considered the sole pride of our household, while I remained nothing but a fading shadow. Every academic achievement or scholarship I earned was quickly dismissed to make room for her entirely trivial milestones. I spent years trying to prove my worth through hard work before realizing that their bias was a permanent fixture in our family dynamic. Dad and Mom had built an unshakable pedestal for her that left absolutely no space for me to exist comfortably under the same roof. I decided to leave my hometown immediately after graduation to build an independent business consulting firm in New York. I packed my essential belongings into a single suitcase and bought a one-way ticket without asking them for a single dime. The early days were intensely demanding as I navigated a highly competitive corporate market without any financial backing or industry connections. I worked relentlessly through countless nights to analyze retail market trends and develop turnaround strategies for struggling enterprises across the East Coast. To protect my personal information from unwanted scrutiny from my past, I actively operated my enterprise through a professional executive board. I utilized the professional pseudonym Hart for all my corporate dealings and official documents. The executive board handled all public relations and direct client interactions, while I remained safely behind the scenes, directing the core business operations. This specific setup allowed me to build a formidable reputation in the mergers and acquisition sector without ever exposing my real identity to the public eye. 5 years ago, Mr. Dalton's company faced a severe crisis that threatened to wipe out his entire generational legacy. The national retail market crash left his conglomerate on the brink of absolute ruin, with thousands of employee livelihoods hanging in the balance. I took on the massive project and personally mapped out the comprehensive restructuring plan to rescue his business from complete collapse. The recovery strategy required aggressive financial maneuvering and department consolidations that I calculated with extreme precision over several months. I silently signed the legal contracts through a secure email system and refused all requests for face-to-face meetings. He tried multiple times to arrange video conferences or private dinners to discuss the execution phases of the turnaround strategy. I maintained strict professional boundaries by communicating solely through encrypted messages to ensure my anonymity remained completely intact. I disappeared completely right after his conglomerate successfully navigated the bankruptcy phase and stabilized its market value on the stock exchange. Despite the emotional distance I maintained, I still felt a basic sense of responsibility toward the people who raised me. Over the past 3 years, I regularly deducted a portion of my corporate revenue to send through an intermediary law firm located in downtown Manhattan. This money was specifically allocated to pay off the overdue mortgage on Dad and Mom's house back in Las Vegas. I instructed my lawyers to transfer the funds discreetly to prevent the bank from initiating foreclosure proceedings against their property. Dad and Mom never questioned the actual origin of those substantial monthly bank transfers saving their home from being auctioned. They blindly believed Angelica's fabricated lies that this sudden financial support came directly from her recent stroke of luck. She confidently convinced them that her high society connections and brilliant investment ventures were generating the cash flow keeping a roof over their heads. They praised her endlessly for being the absolute savior of the family, while remaining completely oblivious to the reality of who was actually signing the checks. 30 minutes before the official ceremony of the engagement party began, the atmosphere surrounding my current position suddenly became incredibly tense. Angelica marched directly toward the senior hotel manager with a furious expression and loudly demanded that he confiscate my VIP access card immediately. She argued that a person of my low status had no business holding a credential meant exclusively for the elite members of the Dalton family circle. The manager looked slightly uncomfortable, but ultimately complied with the bride's aggressive demand to avoid causing an unnecessary scene inside the luxurious venue. Angelica then explicitly instructed the nearby security personnel to keep a close watch on my every movement throughout the entire evening, as if I were a potential threat. "You have absolutely no right to sit in this exclusive area, so go wait by the security island or stand perfectly still in that hidden corner if you still want to witness my wedding," Angelica commanded with a sharply raised voice. Following her daughter's cruel lead, Mom quickly approached the back row of tables where the event coordinators had originally placed my designated seating arrangement. She aggressively snatched the elegantly printed name card bearing my identity and crumpled the thick parchment paper without a single second of hesitation. She tossed the ruined card directly into the nearby service trash can while glaring at me with a look of pure contempt and unhidden disgust. Mom made it abundantly clear that I was expected to remain standing for the remainder of the lengthy event to avoid becoming an unsightly distraction to their prestigious guests. She muttered under her breath that my plain attire and quiet demeanor would completely ruin the glamorous aesthetic they had spent several months cultivating for this specific night. Before I could even process that specific level of maternal hostility, Dad grabbed my elbow and forcefully steered me toward the main reception desk near the entrance. He pointed a demanding finger at the heavy leather-bound guest book reserved for distant acquaintances and random business associates, rather than immediate family members. He shoved a luxury fountain pen into my hand and ordered me to register my attendance under a fake identity instead of our shared family surname. "Sign the general guest registry immediately and absolutely do not open your mouth to call us your parents in front of Mr. Dalton," Dad threatened in a remarkably low but incredibly menacing voice. He heavily emphasized that any attempt to claim a biological connection would result in my immediate physical removal from the hotel premises by the armed guards. I stood perfectly still in complete silence while watching my own blood relatives desperately use my public humiliation as a stepping stone to elevate their social value. They were actively constructing a flawless facade of high-class sophistication for the wealthy groom's family by entirely erasing my physical existence from their official lineage. Their coordinated efforts to degrade my basic humanity revealed a deeply ingrained toxicity that went far beyond mere favoritism and crossed into intentional psychological cruelty. I realized that remaining inside this grand ballroom would only subject me to further calculated indignities designed entirely to massage their incredibly fragile egos. I calmly walked over to the coat check counter and retrieved my old woolen trench coat with the firm intention of leaving this royal banquet hall without looking back. I needed to protect the last shred of my personal dignity instead of continuing to participate in this pathetic theatrical performance, orchestrated by the people who shared my blood. As the thunderous applause of the elite guests erupted to signal the start of the ceremony, Mr. Dalton stepped onto the high podium, but suddenly came to a complete standstill. He discarded the thick stack of prepared speech documents onto the velvet lectern and stared intently with a stunned expression toward the back of the grand hall. His gaze was locked firmly onto my face as I stood near the exit, causing a wave of confusion to ripple through the sea of tuxedoed attendees. Without uttering a single syllable to his audience, he quickly descended the stairs of the stage and forcefully pushed past the relatives who were desperately trying to surround him for a handshake. He moved with a sense of urgency that defied the rigid protocols of this formal engagement party, while making a beeline directly toward the far corner where I remained. Mr. Dalton stopped right in front of me, his heavy breathing audible in the sudden silence that had paralyzed the entire room. His eyes were wide with genuine disbelief, and his hands trembled noticeably when he reached out to steady himself against the table next to me. He searched my face for several long seconds as if trying to verify that the person standing before him was not a hallucination born from his own memories. The room was so quiet that the faint clinking of silverware from the distant kitchen tables sounded like thunder to everyone present in the hall. He finally found his voice, though it cracked with deep emotion as he addressed me in front of the horrified onlookers. "Are you Hart, the brilliant woman who saved my entire family legacy from total destruction 5 years ago?" Mr. Dalton asked, with a voice that was thick with suppressed tears. I maintained a composed demeanor, meeting his intense gaze while feeling the burning stares of my parents and Angelica drilling into my back from a short distance away. I nodded slowly to confirm his suspicion before offering a professional response that shattered the remaining illusions my family had desperately tried to maintain throughout the evening. "Yes, I am Colleen Hart, the person who successfully executed the corporate turnaround project for your organization through the secure online portal," I replied in a calm, steady tone. Mr. Dalton let out a ragged breath of relief and immediately reached out to embrace my shoulders with a sense of immense gratitude that transcended all social barriers. The sight of the powerful tycoon hugging an outcast left Keith and the rest of my family standing in absolute paralyzed horror. They watched in total disbelief as the man they had spent months trying to impress showed more respect to me than he had ever shown to their hand-picked bride. Mr. Dalton then turned back toward the audience while keeping one hand firmly on my arm to ensure I did not retreat back into the shadows. He grabbed the wireless microphone from the nearest staff member and cleared his throat to command the total attention of every single entrepreneur in the room. He loudly declared before the hundreds of distinguished guests that I was the legendary strategic CEO he had been searching for across the country for the past 5 years. He recounted the magnitude of the crisis he had faced and emphasized that without my intervention, his entire conglomerate would have ceased to exist long ago. The atmosphere in the hall shifted violently from polite celebration to overwhelming shock as the true identity of the woman they had treated like a servant was finally revealed to the world. 10 seconds after the CEO's declaration, the social hierarchy inside the grand ballroom completely disintegrated and rearranged itself around my physical presence. Senior executives from renowned international corporations immediately rose from their dining tables and pushed forward through the dense crowd, abandoning their expensive courses to reach my side with expressions of profound professional respect. They were no longer looking at the bride or the host family, as their entire attention was laser-focused on the woman they had previously dismissed as a lowly service staff member. The air in the room felt heavy with the sudden shift in power, as every person in the hall realized they had been witnessing a monumental transformation of social standing. One particularly influential industrialist, who had been trying to secure a partnership with my firm for several months, stepped into my personal space with a look of dawning realization and disbelief. "So, you are the CEO behind the strategic investment fund that our business was flatly rejected by last month," the businessman remarked with a mixture of shock and lingering awe. I stood my ground, maintaining my professional composure while the entire room waited for my direct response to his public observation. "That is correct. We only accept projects that are transparent and possess a clear foundation of business ethics. I replied with a calm, unwavering tone that signaled my firm authority to everyone within earshot. My mother stood frozen in place, her face draining of color as she processed the reality that the daughter she had treated with such overt disdain now commanded more power and social influence than she could ever comprehend. She clutched her expensive clutch bag with trembling fingers, finally realizing that the financial support they had been receiving was not a stroke of luck, but a calculated choice by the very person she had tried to expel from the event. Meanwhile, my father scrambled through the surrounding wall of security personnel, desperate to mitigate the damage caused by his previous mistreatment of me. He forced a wide, artificial grin onto his face, attempting to slide into the conversation to claim credit for my upbringing and professional success in front of the high-profile partners. Angelica stood at the perimeter, her meticulously crafted facade of high society superiority dissolving into visible panic as she witnessed the sudden shift in power dynamics. She had spent the entire evening mocking my lack of status only to discover that I was the most influential person in the room. The groom's family members who had previously treated her with superficial politeness now turned their backs to focus exclusively on seeking an introduction to me. She looked frantic, searching for any opportunity to regain control of the narrative, but she realized with growing horror that her superficial connections meant absolutely nothing against my concrete professional achievements. The weight of the truth settled over the room like a physical blanket, silencing the whispers that had been directed at me just minutes earlier. Every individual who had participated in the effort to isolate or humiliate me now stood in the uncomfortable shadow of their own poor judgment. I moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, accepting the business cards and formal invitations from the gathered elite who were eager to align themselves with my firm. The orchestrated performance of the engagement party had been completely dismantled, leaving only the reality of who I had become through my own relentless work and strategic vision. My family members remained isolated in the background, witnessing the total collapse of their social ambitions, while I solidified my position as the central figure of the evening. As the situation outside spiraled beyond their control, my father grabbed my wrist and forcefully dragged me into the private waiting room located behind the grand stage. He slammed the heavy mahogany door shut effectively, isolating us from the stunned silence currently permeating the main ballroom. Mom was pacing back and forth across the carpeted floor, her face contorted with intense anger as she accused me of sabotaging the most important evening of our family's public life. She claimed that my silence regarding my true status was a deliberate ploy to destroy them in front of the powerful families we were attempting to align ourselves with. They unleashed a relentless barrage of verbal abuse, characterizing my refusal to play the submissive role as a selfish act designed to trap them in a humiliating public spectacle. Angelica threw herself onto the plush leather sofa, her expensive makeup smearing as she wept with desperation. She pleaded with me to return to the ballroom and announced that I was merely a low-level assistant within my own consulting firm. She insisted that lying about my position would save her engagement and prevent the complete collapse of her reputation among the high society circle. Her voice cracked repeatedly as she begged me to prioritize her future over my own professional integrity and self-respect, completely ignoring the damage she had caused me for years. You must go back out there and immediately clarify that you are just a hired worker, or else you will destroy your sister's entire marriage arrangement, Mom hissed while standing directly in my personal space with a menacing glare. I looked at them with a sense of complete detachment, feeling no obligation to protect their fabricated illusions any longer. I reached into my pocket, retrieved my smartphone, and tapped the screen to open the encrypted application containing my comprehensive financial history. I held the device up, displaying the detailed bank statements and legal transaction logs that proved exactly where the funds had originated for the past 3 years. You need to look closely at these wire transfer receipts to understand exactly who has been paying for the food on your table and the roof over your head for all this time," I stated with a voice that cut through the silence of the room. My father stumbled backward, his eyes scanning the digital proof that contradicted every story Angelica had ever concocted about her successful business ventures. He could clearly see the transaction dates matching the exact moments when the bank had been on the verge of foreclosing on our childhood home. The realization washed over him, draining the color from his cheeks as he finally grasped the magnitude of the lie he had been fed by his favorite daughter. Angelica began to scramble, her panicked eyes darting around the room as she attempted to offer flimsy excuses for the legal documents that were now exposing her fraudulent claims. She tried to suggest that there had been a misunderstanding, but the undeniable presence of the attorney's digital signature on every document dismantled her weak defense. The fragile facade of her social success crumbled completely, leaving her exposed in the quiet room where no guests were present to witness her perform. I watched the scene unfold without any desire to comfort them, knowing that the truth was the only currency that mattered in this confrontation. My parents stood there in silence, forced to reconcile the daughter they had cruelly cast aside with the successful professional who had been their secret benefactor all along. Just as the heated argument within the private waiting room reached its most volatile peak, the heavy wooden door was suddenly pushed open with significant force from the hallway. Keith stepped into the room, followed closely by Mr. Dalton, both men wearing expressions of absolute frostiness that signaled they had heard every word of our confrontation. The silence that followed their entrance was suffocating as the gravity of their presence immediately silenced the hysterical accusations my family had been hurling at me just moments ago. Angelica froze in place, her eyes widening with pure terror as she realized the man she intended to marry had witnessed the total unraveling of her carefully constructed deception. She scrambled toward him in a frantic attempt to salvage the situation, reaching out with shaking hands to grab his sleeve in a desperate bid for understanding. Keith recoiled as if she were a toxic substance, firmly brushing her off with a look of profound disgust that effectively shattered her last remaining hope for a life of luxury. "I will never marry a deceitful woman, someone who stole her own sister's achievements to trade for vanity," Keith declared coldly, his voice echoing with finality throughout the small, claustrophobic room. Angelica stumbled backward as if he had physically struck her, and the light vanished from her eyes as she processed the permanent destruction of her engagement. She fell to her knees, dragging herself across the floor to clutch at his polished shoes while sobbing with an intensity that bordered on madness. "Please forgive me. I did all of this only because I wanted to be worthy of your status," Angelica begged, while her tears ruined the flawless makeup she had spent hours preparing earlier that day. Her pleas fell upon completely deaf ears, as Keith did not spare a single glance at the pathetic figure she had become in her attempt to save the sinking ship of her social reputation. Mr. Dalton stepped forward, his posture radiating the authority of a man who had been betrayed by the very people he had trusted with his corporate connections. He signaled toward the hallway, and two uniformed security guards from the Venetian arrived instantly to stand at the threshold of our private space. He did not hesitate to issue the command that would effectively exile my family from the most prestigious event of the social season. "Remove these individuals from the hotel premises immediately and ensure they never step foot near my corporate properties ever again," Mr. Dalton ordered with a tone of icy detachment that left absolutely no room for debate or negotiation. The security personnel moved efficiently to escort my parents and sister toward the rear exit, leaving them to grapple with the sudden and humiliating reality of their irreversible social downfall. I turned my back on the entire spectacle, walking out of the waiting room without looking back at the wreckage of the family who had spent years trying to dismantle my identity. I felt no sorrow for the loss of their approval as I stepped forward into the cool night air, ready to finally reclaim the life I had built on my own terms. Exactly 1 month after the catastrophic night that forever changed the trajectory of our lives in Las Vegas, the entire foundation of my biological family's daily existence descended into an unstoppable and chaotic spiral of total economic collapse. The widespread information regarding the moral scandal and the calculated financial deception involved in that engagement party leaked into the local business circles, causing all former partners to collectively cancel their existing commercial contracts with my father's struggling retail establishment. Because I made the resolute decision to completely cut off the substantial monthly financial stipends that had sustained their lavish lifestyle for years, the local bank rejected any requests for credit extensions and immediately delivered a final notice regarding the total foreclosure of our childhood home. My mother persisted in attempting to reach out through numerous tearful phone calls that pleaded for my forgiveness, but I chose to maintain my strict stance by blocking every single line of communication to ensure my own mental peace remained undisturbed. She could no longer rely on the fabricated stories of success to hide the truth from her peers, as the local community became aware of the massive debt burden they had been hiding. Angelica was eventually forced to abandon her previous lifestyle of extreme excess and vanity to seek out demanding, low-level menial labor just to cover the basic expenses that were required for her daily survival in the harsh reality of the urban environment. She had to trade her designer clothing for standard work uniforms, a shift in circumstances that served as a constant reminder of the consequences of her dishonest choices. Standing on the highest floor of my new professional office complex, I felt a deep sense of genuine peace as I looked out over the skyline, while acknowledging that I had finally drawn a clear boundary with the toxic individuals who shared my blood. I realized that my success was never dependent on their validation or their approval, but rather on the disciplined commitment I had made to my own professional growth and ethical standards. This story serves as a clear testament to the fact that we should never tolerate injustice even when it is disguised under the veil of familial obligations or emotional manipulation. Financial autonomy and personal integrity act as the most powerful weapons to protect your individual dignity against those who are driven solely by their own selfishness. Please remember that the law of karma exists in a very practical sense within our daily lives, as those who spread deceit and ingratitude will eventually face the consequences of the collapse they created with their own hands. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all the audience members who dedicated their valuable time to listen to this story until the final second. Your ongoing support serves as a significant source of motivation for me as I continue to develop more content that explores the complexities of human relationships and professional ethics. Please feel free to leave your own personal perspective and comments directly below this video so that we can engage in a constructive discussion about how to handle civil behavior when faced with difficult family conflicts. Thank you for being a part of this journey, and I look forward to connecting with all of you in the next installment of these real-life experiences.